Here's an idea. War is constantly changing, but it probably won't change to anything resembling soccer anytime soon. With the World Cup front and center, Garrick on Twitter and a bunch of other people asked us a question we've seen a lot during the 3 global sports showdowns that have transpired during Idea Channel's existence. Could a competitive sporting event ever replace war? There are 2 approaches to this, I think. The first asks if the outcomes reached at competitive sporting events will ever replace the outcomes reached by bullets and explosions. Not to get all Betteridge's Law on our own episode, but I'm gonna say no. Like, imagine that because they've just won the World Cup, that Germany, for the next 4 years, is now officially the world's top economic, cultural, and defense force. Or even less grand, imagine that any nation pulls off a huge win against some other nation, showing them aggression, and at the ref's final whistle, everyone puts their guns down and shakes hands. All of the jets are melted down into non-violent toys for the kids instead of being used to assert dominance or as showings of force. And another way to look at this is to consider international sporting's long history of strengthening diplomatic ties. Iran's win against the US in the '98 World Cup has been called, quote, the most politically charged game in World Cup history. At its conclusion, the Iranian players handed their US counterparts flowers, and then everyone posed for a big ol' friendly group photo. US defender Jeff Aguz said that we did more in 90 minutes than the politicians did in 20 years. In the early 70s, ping pong diplomacy, where America and China traded Olympic-level table tennis players, signaled a huge improvement in US-China relations. It led directly to Nixon's visit to the People's Republic of China, making him the first American president to do so.
Nixon always wins!
Which might make us feel warm and fuzzy, but diplomacy is very different from war. Ideally, it lessens the likelihood of or need for combat, but it does not replace it. Unfortunately, diplomacy, the Olympics, or the World Cup would never stand in for the goals or ambitions of a leader or military force if they got it in their mind that physical violence was necessary. In order for soccer or any sport to replace military action, their outcomes would have to be respected similarly. And, I mean, yeah, people take soccer seriously, but not that seriously. So I guess that's it. Seems like the answer to this one is a pretty solid no. What do you guys think? Let us know in the comments. I mean, I guess we could go one step further and ask why we ask this question, why we see this situation, sports as a replacement for battle, as being meaningful, why it shows up in places like Samsung commercials.
And the stakes could not be higher. The battle for Earth's survival is well and truly on, and quite a battle it's going to be. Can football save the planet?
First and foremost, war is bad. World peace is, I think, a thing that we would all like to happen. And the idea that international sports contests could eventually lead to that is probably inspired by the idea that the Olympics were invented to, or had the secondary effect of diffusing or replacing combat amongst ancient Greek territories. Unfortunately, that idea is a big ol' thing that is not true. Sorry. The Olympic truce is a thing that does exist, but its scope is pretty narrow. To quote Olympic.org, during the truce period, athletes, artists, and their families, as well as ordinary pilgrims, could travel in total safety to attend or participate in the Olympic Games. Additionally, it said that the host city should not be warred upon, and countries competing in the games shouldn't actually fight when they meet on the field or court or fencing, runway, or plank. Track? Fencing track. Countries sending teams to the games are encouraged to adopt the spirit of the truce, but I mean, could you imagine? We're sending some guys and a ball to Russia, so better stop the bombings. In the 20th century alone, we've even canceled the Olympics 3 times to fight wars, in 1916, 1940, and 1944. It is easy for us to see connections between war and sport. Strategy, cunning, competition, national pride, the expenditure of resources. But, and here comes just a gross understatement, they are very different things. Games like chess and Go are popularly regarded as microcosms of intense, vaguely militaristic strategy. Go is thought to have possibly been derived from the wartime maps of tribal Chinese generals. Lacrosse, as it was originally played by Native Americans and Canadians, was meant as a, quote, symbolic warfare, sometimes involving hundreds of players who saw themselves not as athletes seeking victory, but warriors seeking honor. Lessons from these games might be translated to the battlefield. I mean, that is the very purpose of so-called serious games.
Shall we play a game?
We can design games to look like or imitate wartime situations or take some lessons of those games to armed conflict, but I think the reverse is impossible, to design a war as a game. Even the most brutal games are built atop a set of clear rules and are overseen by officials with power that is both respected and effective. Sure, there are things like the Geneva Convention and Protocol, the Hague Conventions, things which seek to establish a set of standards for what is permissible during wartime, but unsurprisingly, these things are not exhaustive and are very difficult to enforce. They are not rules in the strict sense of the word, the one that we find in games and sports. War is what happens when an authority figure, governmental power, or critical mass of citizens stop respecting the sovereignty of the established rules. The idea of sports potentially replacing war is built on a misconception of what modern warfare really is. It is not the classic, glorious two nations meeting on a field of battle to duke it out. War is not some tidy contest where two opposed forces put their resources or national capacity to work defending or advancing their own interest.
Ukraine is game to you, but I take your little bonus.
In reality, especially now, especially after the Cold War, war is just,
There are no teams.
it's a mess. I mean, it's always been a mess, but now it's really a mess. Wanting sports to replace war is a noble and understandable want, but unfortunately, it's something of a category error. It's like wanting bicycles to replace trains or Katy Perry to replace Taylor Schilling. We can see the similarities, but fundamentally, they are very, very different. War is not some clean-cut one against the other face-to-face demonstration of force or skill with one clear victor, the way it is in classic literature or the World Cup. It's a constantly bubbling process underlying politics, the economy, and media. Unfortunately, war is in everything, and we're constantly finding new ways and reasons to support, justify, and fight them, some moral and some not. I know, Ron Perlman says,
War never changes.
but I disagree. I think war is constantly changing. Maybe people never change. Maybe the reasons they fight never change, but the way they fight always changing. But whether it'll eventually change into something resembling that Samsung commercial or Space Jam, I'm pretty skeptical. What do you guys think? Is there a situation in which sports could replace war? Let us know in the comments, and please subscribe. Kudos to everybody who braved a very dangerous comment section from last week's video. Let's see what you had to say about the rules for spoilers. Cyberwolf wonders whether or not there will eventually be features built in to social media to protect people from spoilers. And yeah, there are certain things like Tumblr Savior for Tumblr to block tags and tag filtering in certain Twitter clients, but yeah, like those things rely on people being explicit about tagging those things, and they don't work on images or animated GIFs or stuff like that. So there's a whole bunch of work to be done. I know that there are certain TV show Tumblr accounts, especially like Doctor Who and Orphan Black, that try to be really explicit about, you know, we're gonna live blog this episode that's coming up, and so we're gonna tag it this and make sure you block it if you don't want to know anything. But yeah, right, expecting that from the entire internet. Yeah, will that ever happen? Probably not. KaosNoKamisama sort of boils down what I think the moral of the spoilers episode is, which is that there is really only one rule, and that it is, you know, having empathy and respect for other people, but then goes on to say that claiming a spoiled experience is actually more enjoyable, leverages a kind of value judgment, and says that being able to, like the quote in the episode said, bask more critically and reflexively is definitively more enjoyable, which for a lot of people, maybe it's not, which is a very, very fair point. Victoria Hathaway and a bunch of other people wonder about the time limit or statute of limitations on spoilers, and I think this is the most complicated part of developing spoiler rules. First of all, because it's actually kind of hard, I find, to keep track of how long things have been around, but also your friends are always, or at least my friends are always in a different state of working their way through different pieces of media. And if your friend is like a week or two outside of the deadline, like, are you really going to argue that they can or should be spoiled if they don't want to be? I think like having a deadline, like a date that has to be crossed, having a rule like that is, I think, less useful than trying to develop a sort of general sense. But I don't know, maybe that's just me. Serial Complexity wonders about TV and movie trailers and whether or not people feel that those are spoilers. I think a lot of people do, but I also have been wondering recently whether or not trailers have been showing more of what happens in the movie, because I feel like they do, but I don't have any data on this. And I wonder if they're doing it in response to the kind of research that Emily was talking about. Like, do they know, in some sense, that if people know what's gonna happen, they will enjoy the movie more? And are they encouraging that by actually spoiling the movie in its own trailer? Should I put my tinfoil hat on? I know, it's weird, right? I agree. I think it's strange. James Mackenzie wonders about sports-related spoilers, which is a thing that, we did not touch on at all. And, I wonder, like, because sports do not depend on narrative, at least not narrative as such, not like the way TV shows or movies depend on it, can a sporting event actually be spoiled in a way that, right, it doesn't matter if you know what happens and then that allows you to bask critically and reflexively, that really it is all about the final result. And there may be highlights, like what James says, but that really it's about the outcome. I guess I don't know. I mean, I'm not nearly enough of a sports person to be able to answer this question, but what do you guys think? Are sports the most, like, spoilable thing? I don't know. Ben Streeter asks about media that spoils itself, and actually this is interesting because while we were making the spoiler episode, I was reading Flann O'Brien's The Third Policeman, which its own introduction spoils it, and I think that made it better. I mean, of course, right, I didn't have the unspoiled experience, but knowing what the reveal was, knowing what the twist, it's not really a twist, was, I think, it was, I support that. I was shocked when it happened, a little appalled, but ultimately I was into it. To Drackar, actually, I've been thinking about this a lot over the last week, and I think I agree. I'm gonna change my position. Bud Charles actually wrote a really great comment about losing a Pokemon when he was young, and that recognizes while it might have been a folly of youth in some sense, that makes it no less real and makes the impact on his life and his adulthood no less real. And so, I think I will rescind my pronouncement from last week's episode. And last but by no means least, Emily from BlinkPopShift on last week's video started a comment conversation that was made up entirely of comments left on her own videos with the gender pronouns swapped. It is an upsetting and amazing and powerful reminder of what I think we'll call an unfortunate truth of making YouTube videos. I highly recommend you read the whole thing and then go subscribe to Emily because she is amazing. This week's episode is brought to you by the hard work of these ping-pong diplomats. We have a Facebook and IRC and a subreddit, links in the doobly-doo. And instead of the tweet of the week, I'm going to implore again that you go and read the comment thread that Emily started. Link in the place where links are. You know what it's called. And for this week's record swap, we will be replacing Johnny Cash's Showtime with Holly Herndon's Chorus. I really like the way that looks next to Black Widow. Anyways, adios, Johnny Cash. Welcome, Holly Herndon.